Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 18th Annual Competitive Challenges Conference. My name is Andrew McCollum, and I'm the head of Coalition Greenwich's investment management business. More importantly, I also have the privilege of serving as your Master of Ceremonies for this year's conference. I'd like to begin by thanking each and every one of you for joining us over the next 2 days. It really is the participants and the speakers that make this such a special event each and every year. Similar to events in previous years, we've assembled an outstanding lineup of speakers that are going to discuss and debate the most important topics impacting the asset management industry today. In an effort to fully leverage the digital or virtual platform that we're using again this year, we've included what I think is an exciting twist to this year's event by adding regionally focused sessions in addition to our regular scheduled high quality panels and speakers. Our goal for this year's event is to help all of you really envision what the future of the asset management industry will look like post-pandemic. So are we sitting at the edge of a precipice of significant change, a tipping point, if you will? Or when we look back on 2020 and 2021, will this really just seem like a bump in the road towards inevitable continuous evolution? To answer these questions, we'll hear from leading practitioners about the issues that will dictate the pace of change in our industry. Topics like building strong brands, establishing close partnerships, developing resilient business strategies, or meeting evolving client needs, among many other topics. As is the case in any industry, the firms that have the right strategies and execute efficiently in the areas that matter will come out on top. Coalition Greenwich is privileged to support our clients with the data, analytics, and advice that help them define their path to success. And we're honored to provide a forum for the leaders of the most forward-thinking firms in the industry to discuss shared challenges over the next 2 days. Before we start the program, just a quick review of our agenda for the next 2 days and a few housekeeping items. So on the left-hand side of this page, for the next 3 hours, our focus is going to be on the topics of critical importance in our industry that managers face operating in any region around the world. So globally relevant topics, if you will. To get us started and to set the context for the whole conference, my colleague Davis Walmsley will provide Coalition Greenwich's view on the state of the industry. Then in our first panel, we'll talk about strategies for building differentiated brands in a market where brand and reputation are increasingly impacting purchase decisions. Then we'll take our only break for the morning. You can refresh your coffee, check your messages, but after the break, we'll dive right back in with a discussion about engaging investors in a hybrid world with both virtual and in-person interactions, which I think we can probably all agree is going to be our new reality going forward. We'll also have a panel then on strategy development and execution, and we'll conclude with our keynote speaker, Adam Spector. If you don't know Adam, he's the global head of distribution for Franklin Templeton. He is also the managing partner of Brandywine Global. And in my opinion, he's the one person in the industry that really sits at the epicenter of some of the most important issues impacting our industry today. So I can't wait to hear Adam's perspectives. On the right-hand side of this page, you can see that tonight or tomorrow, depending on your location, we'll start our regionally focused panels. So these panels are going to focus on the topics and the issues that are of greatest importance in those regions. We'll move east to west, and we'll start in Asia tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, which is 9 a.m. Singapore time. Then tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern or 12 noon London time, we'll talk about Europe, and we'll conclude tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. East Coast time with North American topics. If you're not able to attend these sessions live, don't worry. We will be recording all of the sessions, and we'll be sending out the recordings following the conference. All right, a few housekeeping items before we get started, just in case you're not entirely comfortable with the Zoom platform. When you joined this virtual session, the system automatically put you on mute and turned off your webcam. So you're all in sort of a listen only, view only mode at this point. During the session, you'll have the ability to ask questions to the participants and the panelists at the bottom of your screen. You can submit these questions either anonymously or with attribution. It's your choice, and you don't need to wait until the Q&A session. You can do it at any time. You'll also have the option for upvoting questions submitted by other attendees, which I think is kind of a fun thing to do. And it also helps the moderators identify the most important questions. So please use that feature. In order to see all of the speakers presenting in the session, go to View Options, and on the top of your screen, choose Side by Side. And finally, of course, if you're having any technical issues at any point, just use the Raise Your Hand feature, and we'll do our best to help you through the chat function. Okay. So with all of that out of the way, let's let the games begin here, and I'll now turn the video over to my colleague, Davis Walmsley, who is the head of client relationships at Coalition Greenwich, to get us started. Davis, over to you, my friend.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate everyone taking some time. Today, we are going to, we're excited to share with you our broad perspectives on the evolving asset management landscape and discuss how you can best position your organizations for future success. This morning's discussion is going to focus on client centricity, which we believe will guide the path forward and really separate the organizations who are poised to grow market share further versus those that are going to be challenged to retain clients and gain inflows. The only constant is change. The asset management industry is continually evolving, but the pace and scale of change has accelerated through the pandemic. We've seen large-scale mergers like Franklin Templeton's acquisition of Legg Mason. We've seen rationalizations like AJO deciding to close its doors. And we've seen rebirths. We're seeing Allspring Global Investments emerge from its divestiture with Wells Fargo. With all of these transformations, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And clients are going to judge these firms based upon their ability to meet their challenges and to solve their problems. Ultimately, the investors are going to be the arbiters of success. Franklin Templeton is going to have to articulate a clear vision on why the combination is good, not only for shareholders, but also for clients. As Andrew mentioned, we've got Adam Spector here later this morning, who's going to provide his perspective as the head of global distribution. Now, Ted Aronson, he felt like he couldn't deliver on the objectives for his clients and decided to close the organization. But I'm sure you all saw the recent announcement that he's reemerging and he is going to restart his firm, AJO Vista, which is an interesting play on really client centricity, where he's really building off a relationship they had with one key client to sort of restart the organization. So it'll be interesting to see how he's able to regain confidence more broadly. And Joe Sullivan and the team at Allspring, they're going to need to create an identity away from Wells Fargo to retain clients and to garner new inflows. So let's take a look at some of the challenges facing asset owners to understand how managers can respond in order to remain relevant. Asset owners are faced with a myriad of challenges, some of which have been further exacerbated by the pandemic. Despite the strong performance across the major industries over the past year, many pension funds are still in underfunded positions. We see the average pension fund is below 80% and many in much worse positions. Many companies and municipalities have been stretched from a budgetary perspective, and we've seen that the investment-related headcount at these organizations has declined by 20% over the past 3 years. Volatility in the market is testing investors' ability to maintain liquidity while also meeting their investment objectives. Last year, at the outbreak of the pandemic, we saw the VIX spike to 3 times the 5-year average. Corporate CFOs that have been focused on managing the business through this extremely challenging time are continuing to explore options to push the pension plans off balance sheet. And we've seen over $30 billion in pension buyouts so far this year. And all investors are dealing with increased complexity. Part of this is coming from the further expansion we're seeing into private markets, into areas like real estate, into private equity, and into infrastructure. Later this evening or this morning or tomorrow, depending on where you're located, during our Asian session, we're going to have a panel discussion titled Seeking the Holy Grail in Private Assets. Now, if you've boned up on your Japanese language skills, we more than welcome you to listen into that panel, which will be quite interesting. So let's take a look. What is on the asset owner's wish list? What are the things that they want, and how are they going about getting these? The plans that are in those underfunded status or facing the reality of ever-growing liabilities, they're looking for more alpha. And they're looking to private markets to get that. We're seeing growth across private markets in every geography, across North America, Europe, and Asia. We see investors that are pushing asset managers for lower fees, and they're trying to accomplish this in a couple of different ways. We're seeing greater bundling of services across managers. So we see plans that are working with fewer managers and having larger relationships. And we're also seeing active blending of active strategies and passive strategies as a way to further reduce fees. Given the volatility in the marketplace, investors are seeking greater downside protection. And we're seeing growth among the corporate plans as they're increasing their allocations to liability-driven investing, as well as the increased demand for low-vol equity type products. Investors are seeking insights and knowledge transfer from their partners like asset managers such as yourselves. And we've seen a tremendous increase in terms of the volume of webinars, white papers, and events. They're seeking broader portfolio support. We're seeing them reach out beyond the relationships they're having with the investment consultants to asset managers and to other parties to get broader insights into how they can best manage their portfolio. They're doing this through online tools, through more customized engagements, as well as seeking broader advice. And one of the more interesting elements through the course of this is that we're seeing that asset owners are being more critical and thinking more about wanting to partner with organizations with whom they have shared values. And we're seeing that manifest itself in the way that they're thinking about incorporating environmental, social, and governance practices into their portfolio, as well as the increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with this wish list in mind, how should asset managers best position themselves to continue to capture market share? First, you need to articulate a purpose-driven vision. You need to be able to answer the question, why do you do what you do? And this is important not only for retaining and attracting assets, but it's also critical for retaining and attracting talent. This is going to be a key differentiator going forward. Second, enhancing the digital experience, leveraging technology to engage with clients in new and exciting ways. Third, optimize the product lineup, filling out the product gaps, creating innovative solutions to the challenges that we're seeing investors facing. Fourth, developing a partnership mindset, going beyond the mandate to develop deeper relationships with key clients to both ensure retention as well as to grow those relationships. And fifth, maintaining flexibility with third parties, embracing and managing co-opetition, and finding ways to create win-win outcomes with these institutions. So let's take each one of these in turn and dig in a little bit deeper. No three letters have been used more in Zoom meetings across the asset management industry in the last 18 months than E, S, and G. And while broad-scale adoption varies by region and definitional issues remain a challenge, asset managers can no longer ignore this movement. In our research with over 300 asset owners globally, we saw increased adoption of ESG across geographies. Europe has increased almost full adoption, with close to 90% of investors incorporating ESG into their portfolios. Asia pushed past 50% and eclipsed 2/3 of investors who are incorporating it. And North America saw a big jump, with half of investors stating that they are now incorporating ESG to some degree in their portfolios, up from just over a quarter 2 years ago. For your part, you must look for ways to embrace ESG, both from a bottoms-up as well as a tops-down perspective. We're hearing from asset owners that they want managers to be able to articulate a clear approach for how they're incorporating ESG within the portfolio, but also thinking about how are they demonstrating the commitment at a broader organizational level. Looking at the focus areas for ESG within the various regions, European investors who've been most forward-thinking in the adoption of ESG continue to focus on the environment. And we've seen these focuses come through the challenges that are being expressed through the Paris Climate Accord, with Turkey being the last of the G20 countries to further ratify that climate accord. Asian investors show the greatest interest in governance as companies enhance practices related to ownership and oversight, where there's been increased regulatory pressure. And in North America, particularly the US, we've been rattled by the social protests of the past year with the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And there's a renewed focus on climate and the environment brought about by the Biden administration. So during our Asian session, we'll have a panel focused on responding to investors' rapidly evolving needs related to ESG. Another key element of the purpose-driven mission is diversity. Over the past several years, we've witnessed increased focus on gender and race inequality, and many consultants are incorporating diversity into their evaluation processes. Some have gone so far as to isolate diverse teams and to measure the relative outperformance of those teams. Unlike ESG, this is being done primarily at the corporate level as opposed to the portfolio level. In a recent paper we authored on the topic, we evaluated the performance of managers perceived to be leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion relative to other managers, based upon feedback from leading investment consultants. And what we found was pretty staggering. DE&I leaders had Greenwich Quality Index scores, a measure of overall relationship health, well above the base group. So consultants clearly perceiving a better relationship with these organizations. And probably more importantly, on the right-hand side of the page, DE&I leaders were 3 times more likely to appear on the consultant shortlists. So while this is a relatively new focus, it's already having a big impact on business outcomes. Managers are going to have to disclose more regarding the complexion of their investment teams and their broader organizations, as well as the policies and procedures in place to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward. Now, the pandemic has forced all of us to change our behaviors, and we're all interacting more virtual than we ever did. And today's conference is yet another example of this. A couple of months ago, we had hoped to do this conference in person in Chicago, but now the Delta variant has pushed us back to a Zoom environment. But we're happy to be able to interact with you at least in this type of forum. And so likewise, investors are continuing to engage with asset managers more on digital platforms. And this engagement is shaping their impression of the managers. In our recent study focused on digital engagement, we found that over 1/3 of the respondents cited client portals as a necessity. And almost 1/5 of investors believe that a firm's digital presence has a significant impact on brand recognition, up from less than 10% just 3 years ago. In the asset management industry, it's typically the institutional group that's setting the trends that then sort of trickle their way down to retail. And I think what we've seen related to digital is that this is the opposite. Retail groups are much further ahead in terms of their ability to leverage digital, to share insights, and to deliver mass customized feedback to clients. Managers with a presence in both markets are well positioned and should be looking for opportunities to leverage capabilities and processes across those groups. Our next panel will touch on what it takes to create a truly differentiated brand, and I'm sure that managing the digital experience will be a key element. Over the past 3 years, we've witnessed an increased engagement across all digital channels, which has been accelerated by the pandemic. The demand and volume for webinars has exploded. Asset owners value the opportunity to engage with portfolio managers and analysts during these interactive sessions. They appreciate the ability to ask questions and hear what's on the mind of their peers. They also value the ability to access the recordings afterwards to watch on their own time, as well as receiving any content shared during the events. We've seen increased utilization of newsletters and manager websites. Continue to be important ways that investors are engaging with managers. Podcasts have also seen a dramatic pop as a convenient way to listen and learn when away from the computer. And we expect that this will continue to increase as we all migrate back to more commuting and more regular business travel. Social media is an area where I know a lot of us are individually spending time and organizations are putting more effort. And while it has increased, it still lags many of the other media outlets. We see the biggest engagement in terms of LinkedIn, and that's the platform that's expected to grow the most going forward. Now, the key to capturing investors' mind share is to prioritize the quality ahead of quantity while producing enough content for these channels. And it's really about making sure that you're finding the right way to gather the insights from PMs, analysts, and package those and deliver those to both clients and prospects. One of the benefits of the virtual environment from an asset owner's perspective has been the increased frequency of engagement with asset managers. And we're all going to have to think about how can we leverage technology to maintain that level of connectivity when we return to a more normalized travel schedule, when we're on the road more and not sitting in front of our computers. During our European session, titled Finding a Path Forward in the New Normal, our panelists will address how they plan to reintroduce, how to manage this sort of reintroduction phase across their teams. Product development has become even more critical than it ever has for organizations that are really seeking to make an impact on investors and the broader community. For a long time, asset managers were able to survive and in many cases thrive, offering highly diversified portfolios that offered limited differentiation relative to the broader market. The proliferation of cheap beta has pushed the benchmark huggers out of the market. Investors are seeking managers with product offerings with unique investment streams capable of generating superior risk-adjusted returns. Now, given the length of time it takes the products to come to market and the associated resources, successful firms are combining insights across multiple groups to answer these key questions. From a strategy perspective, does the product align with the overall firm goals? From an investment perspective, do we have the in-house capabilities to credibly execute? From a distribution perspective, is there sufficient demand? And do our teams position properly to be able to sell this into the marketplace? From a marketing perspective, does this align with the brand and the brand image that we've put forth? And from a finance perspective, is this product going to be able to scale? And are we going to be able to do it profitably? As a starting point, managers need to think about the concentric circles outside of their core strategies where they are known and have credibility. So thinking about those areas that they can expand. Managers who create robust product development systems can avoid some of the distractions, like chasing that flavor of the month, and prepare the organization to compete effectively in the future. The challenges facing investors are evolving, and managers need to innovate their product portfolios to keep pace. They need to continually evaluate the existing products on the shelf, as well as looking for opportunities to identify gaps and hone in on those areas of expansion. Avoiding the pitfalls of product proliferation and unsuccessful launches requires a clear process that marries the demand dynamics with the manager's capabilities and brings that together. This should include information from third parties on key trends and competitor performance, as well as internal assessments of the team's investment capabilities and the distribution team's ability to sell within their existing market footprint. One of the things that we see that differentiates organizations we view to be best in class from those that are simply average is the presence of and the use of feedback loops across this product development cycle. So how are they doing? What are they doing to address changes related to demand, to competitive positioning, to regulatory issues, and to pricing? Organizations that think about this throughout the process are able to make tactical shifts to help inform the product to make an even stronger product come out of the back end. Later today, we'll have a panel focused on next generation strategy, which will touch on the topic of product mix. Performance, in many ways, has become table stakes. Investors are increasingly looking for managers to deliver value beyond alpha. As part of our annual research with institutional investors, we asked asset owners to set performance aside and to rank various sales attributes. And what we found was that the value-added capabilities stood out, with over half of respondents ranking it as first, ahead of elements such as brand. Now, at the same time, managers cannot be all things to all investors. Faced with increased margin pressure from reduced fees and increased regulatory requirements, managers must be judicious about the way they allocate scarce resources. Managers should be actively tiering their clients based upon fit and value, seeking to prioritize the clients that most closely align with their organization from a culture and capabilities perspective. We'll have a panel later today focused on how engagement has shifted during the pandemic and what has worked to both solidify relationships as well as to foster new engagements. Investors are looking for partners and not simply products. They want to work with managers that understand their needs. Managers who selectively provide advisory services or enhanced levels of access to PMs or strategists to their top tier clients are positioning the firm well to retain these relationships during periods of underperformance. Client service, we've witnessed, has become a way for firms to distinguish themselves. As a way to take a look at this more closely, we reviewed the feedback from our institutional investor research, where we asked clients to identify the managers they viewed to have strategic advisory relationships with. And when we isolated these responses, we found that these organizations outperformed the base group across all elements of client service. But the ones that really stood out were three. First, the capabilities of the relationship manager. At leading firms, these individuals act as the quarterback, delivering the firm to the client. They're able to marshal all the resources and align those properly and bring those to the client. Number two was the understanding of the client's goals. High-performing RMs know their clients well. They're able to share relevant insights, and they're able to identify opportunities to expand the relationship. And third, the usefulness of the informal reviews, the discussions that the RMs are having during the periods when the product specialist or the portfolio manager isn't in the room. So I think you can see there's a common theme across these. This, at the end of the day, this is still very much a people business, and relationship managers play a critical role in this. The other element that's largely impacted by these strategic advisory relationships is thought leadership. And we've seen the increased consumption from institutional investors during this time. What we found was that strategic advisors were 2.5 times more likely to be cited as thought leaders from their clients relative to the base group. So investors are allocating their mind share with these firms, thus making it easier for these firms to engage with these clients in deeper and more meaningful ways. Tomorrow, during North American session, we're going to have a panel of plan sponsors, and they're going to share their perspectives on the relationships they've forged with asset managers and what's really stood out. Now, the lines between the investment consultants and managers continues to blur. We've seen consultants shift significant resources to expanding their OCIO offerings, and some have taken on asset management responsibilities and are actively managing money for clients. Asset managers, for their part, have taken a more active role in providing portfolio-level advice, and many are offering their own OCIO services, many of which are open architecture. So consultants remain an important intermediary in select markets like North America and the UK, and managers need to maintain flexibility in managing and navigating these relationships. I will be moderating a panel tomorrow during a North American session where we're going to explore this interplay in greater detail with some of the leading figures in the investment consulting business. Now, the pandemic has forced many investors to rethink whether or not they want to play an active role in the management of their organization's pensions or endowments. Some would prefer to focus their energies on managing the company's P&L, addressing the needs of the plan participants, or simply fulfilling the mission of the endowment. And a lot of that has led to a significant growth in OCIO assets over the past 5 years, which have reached almost $2 trillion. Given the challenge that I highlighted earlier in the presentation, combined with the key drivers that you see at the lower left-hand corner of this page in terms of lack of internal resources, better risk management, faster implementation, and greater fiduciary oversight, we believe it's unlikely that this trend is going to reverse course. And then when you look at the leaders shown on the right-hand side, you can see that it's a combination of both asset managers and investment consultants. And investors are going to have to decide whether or not they favor independent, open architecture, or more proprietary approaches that potentially deliver more tactical implementation options. Either way, maintaining open lines of communication across the various levels of the consulting firms in terms of research, OCIO, as well as field, is going to be critical to ensuring that your firm maximizes the commercial opportunity for this important group of intermediaries. So in closing, it's all about delivering on the expectations for clients. So I'm sure that all the parents that are listening in, or those that have nieces and nephews, can appreciate the gamesmanship involved in feeding a small child, which in many ways mirrors the experience that we have working with our own clients. It's all about managing the experience. Marketing is about outlining a vision and telling a compelling story. Engaging narratives are more critical than ever in securing the meetings with new prospects, those where you don't have an existing relationship. Sales is about meeting client needs and objectives with relevant products and services. The better that match, the more likely you are to retain the clients over the long term. And service? Well, service can be messy, but it's during these times where relationship capital is forged and where managers can differentiate their client experience. So ultimately, if you are genuine about your approach to putting client needs at the focal point of your major decisions, you'll be rewarded with loyal clients that will act as advocates for your organization. So please let us know how we can help you and your teams as you look to enhance your own client journey. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Turn it back over to Andrew.
Thanks, Davis. That's, I think, a perfect context-setting conversation for the rest of the conference, and probably good advice for any leader of any firm, right? Focus on client centricity, focus on the customer experience. So thank you for that. Davis mentioned in his comments here, about the impact that digital presence can have on brand reputation. And I suspect that we'll broaden out that discussion a bit more in our first panel session of the morning. So without further delay, I'd like to pass the baton over to my colleague, Mark Buckley, who will be moderating this first panel on creating a truly differentiated brand. Mark, if I could ask you to turn your camera on, and I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. And I will just ask Steve to turn on his camera also. Well, good. Thanks very much for passing that over, Andrew. So welcome everyone to this panel on creating a truly differentiated brand. My name is Mark Buckley. I'm a consultant with Greenwich based in London. I'm going to begin by introducing our panelists. So first, Steve Gorski. Steve is Vice President and Director of Client Service at Dodge & Cox. He's responsible for coordinating the firm's client service and communications teams, and he is a member of the firm's Business Strategy Committee. Also, we're hoping to have Simon Bailey. I should say we've got quite a slight technical glitch at the moment, but Simon is Global Head of Brand at Aberdeen and is accountable for development and implementation of the firm's brand strategy. He has over 25 years of marketing experience and has led functions across the marketing spectrum. So we're hoping that Simon will be able to join imminently. So I thank them for joining the panel and for sharing their insights today. The format of this session will be that I'll make a few comments at the outset, and then I'll ask the panelists to provide their views. Then we'll open it up and answer your questions. I would encourage you to submit your questions really at any time now, and you can we'll handle those as they come up. So let me begin, just a couple of things from my side. I really wanted to cover two things. One, brand management approach. Secondly, a bit on brand value. So this slide here, brand management approach. Well, asset managers follow different paths when it comes to brand. I mean, there's many different ways that they approach it. We've identified a series of sort of key brand management activities, which are summarized on this slide. And I thought I would just share this with you and walk through this to kind of kick it off. So in terms of the steps, 4 steps here, first is to define the firm's value proposition. So we think about brand as the communication of the firm's value proposition. And so the key question here is, what are the key differentiating elements of the firm's value proposition? Now, this is a lot easier said than done. It's hard work to distill, to crystallize, and in fact, to agree on a firm's value proposition. And it's important to ensure that the differentiators that a firm selects are aligned with the firm's aspirations and culture. So that's step one. And that requires a look in the mirror, look inside. The second step is align with market perception. So to look outside and to test it. So does the target market, the firm's target market, actually value the attributes of the firm's value proposition? How do investors and external stakeholders perceive the firm on these various attributes? And how do competitors perform against those attributes? At this stage, managers will often perform a brand audit. So really to obtain objective external feedback on their value proposition. So step 3 is to activate it, really to bring it to life. And so some of the key questions here, what are the core messages that need to be emphasized? What does the firm need to do to communicate it internally to ensure that employees are aligned and their actions are aligned to it? How are these messages communicated externally? Which channels are most effective? And how does a manager ensure consistency of messaging? So some key questions really to kind of activate the brand and to bring it to life, as I say. And then finally, after it's been activated, is to monitor. So is the firm's value proposition actually resonating with investors and influencers? And how is the firm doing against its stated objectives? So as I say, asset managers focus and work through kind of brand different ways, but that's a bit of a framework in some of the key considerations on that topic. So in terms of the next slide, in terms of brand value, our research indicates that the perception of a trustworthy brand is positively correlated with overall relationship quality. So Greenwich data shows that on average, asset managers who receive a top mark of 5, this is a scale of 5-point scale, on trustworthy brand, earn on average overall Greenwich Quality Index scores that are 42% higher than managers who receive trustworthy brand scores of 4 or less. So basically, what we're looking at here is taking the data that we have and hundreds and thousands of surveys, and looking at trustworthy brand perceptions in relation to overall quality perceptions of a manager. And overall quality perceptions include investment, service, and relationship management. Trustworthy brand is an independent factor. It does not directly affect the calculation for the overall quality in our research, and it's clear that the intrinsic value is substantial. So, so that's a bit of, I guess, Greenwich data. Additionally, certainly over the last 18 months, as managers have found it more difficult to engage prospects, the value of having a strong brand has certainly been reinforced. So with that, at this stage, I'd like to turn it over to my panelists to make some comments, and then we'll, as I say, go to questions. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Steve to give some thoughts on how the firm is thinking about and approaching this topic.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Mark, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So, as I was thinking about my remarks and thinking about the audience, it occurred to me that a few people out there could be thinking, what a firm that was once described in the press as being seriously old-fashioned and willfully unhip is doing, kicking off a conversation on brand. But of course, there are a wide range of just fantastic brands in our industry, and there's a wide range of ways that you can approach brands. So I was just planning to spend the next 6 minutes walking through how we approach brand at Dodge & Cox, and I'm hoping that our framework can be useful for all of you as you assess your brands. And hopefully we'll get Simon on the line, and hopefully my comments complement what you hear from Simon later on. So first thing I'd say, it's interesting, we actually hired Charlie Ellis back in the early 1990s to help us think about market positioning and branding. And what Charlie emphasized to us then, essentially what we're talking about today, is that in a fragmented marketplace, and the asset management business is a fragmented market, differentiation is going to be key. So as we steward our brand today, we've created this reputation, relevance, and reach framework to really help us stay on track and help us continue to think about how we can differentiate our brand. So before I walk you through what we refer to as 3 R's internally, maybe a little context. First, I think it's important to know that a big part of Dodge & Cox's differentiation is really the fact that we don't focus internally on sales. We don't pay for distribution. We don't do any advertising. And in fact, we don't even have a marketing department. All that said, we have always appreciated the importance of building a strong brand. And when we reflect back on the firm's past success, our reputation is right up there with our firm's ability to generate strong long-term returns for our clients. A strong reputation is especially important for an investor like Dodge & Cox, who uses a contrarian approach, because clients who maintain their trust with us and stick with us over the long term end up with better investment outcomes. And at the end of the day, I think that's why we're all in this business, right? So let me walk through our framework and give you some of the experiences that we've had so far. And again, maybe you can think through whether or not this framework can help you as you assess your brands. And first is reputation. And this is really about your differentiation story. It's about what attributes come to mind when a client or employee, prospective employee, hears your name. And of the 3 R's, reputation is really what we focused on the most over the years at Dodge & Cox. And our differentiation story is really about being passionately focused on investing. Our key brand attributes that come to mind with our clients is investment expertise, client alignment, stability, and trustworthiness. But with respect to differentiation, some of our underlying attributes are perhaps less differentiated today than they used to be. For instance, we were once unique in the industry as having teams manage portfolios. Today, multiple manager constructs are much more commonplace. And so we spend less time today talking with our clients about why teams are better than individuals, and more time talking about what's unique about our collaborative process. We also continue to evolve our reputation as our business evolves. We used to be a regional San Francisco-based manager. Today, we're global. We are known as a kind of an old school Graham and Dodd value style investment shop. But today we've got expertise in quantitative, we've got expertise in ESG, currency, macro. We really want that reputation to reflect all these investments we've been making in innovation for our investment capabilities on behalf of our clients. Clients and stakeholders. The next part of our framework is really relevance, which to us really means who are your stakeholders and how can you help them? On my summer reading list was a great book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller, which for someone like myself who doesn't spend all his time focusing on brand and marketing was really helpful and really useful to me. And Miller makes a great point in the book that the hero of our story brands is not us, it's really our clients. We play the role of guides in our brands. So what we need to do is translate who we are and what we do so our clients and our stakeholders understand how we can help them. And frankly, we're trying to get better at this at Dodge & Cox. For instance, coming back to that key differentiation, we want our clients to understand that our investment focus and our simple business model is really our superpower. It allows us to go deeper into fundamentals, which hopefully allows us to generate superior investment results over time. But it also means that we have far fewer products than just about any of our competitors. And that's fine if it's made relevant. It's just if it's left unaddressed, it could be viewed potentially as a weakness rather than a strength. And so one of the key lessons we've learned as we've thought about brand is that if you don't tell your story and fill those gaps, it could get told for you. And then last on the list is reach. And reach is about activation. How do you get your story out there into the marketplace consistently? And for Dodge & Cox, activation has always been about our people. Our people are essentially our brand ambassadors as we're out in the marketplace. So we always recruit with an eye towards cultural consistency. We spend months and months onboarding new hires. And then we get together regularly as teams to make sure that we're aligned on our mission, our brands, and our strategy. Our employees, we're fortunate, typically spend their entire careers at our firm. And so just over time, we all start living and breathing our brand. I have to say that senior leadership is absolutely critical in activation. And we're not afraid of repeating ourselves when it comes to our differentiation, both internally and externally. Our former chairman liked to refer to this sort of work as Ravel's Bolero. It's about repeating, and then repeating yourself some more. As a result, clients who know us well frequently remark on how consistent we are in explaining our value proposition and our differentiation. And for us, this has led to stable long-term relationships who, in turn, help amplify our brand, which is great. One of the longer-term challenges we face is that, and Davis spoke to this a little bit earlier, our business over time, we see moving incrementally towards more retail channels, which for a firm, again, without a sales team, without a wholesaling group, that could be a disadvantage. And so we're making some investments in digital. Admittedly, we're playing catch up here. We want our website to work for us more than it has in the past. We're looking for ways to improve our email campaigns, make those more effective. And then obviously social, everybody's looking at social and thinking about scalable and effective ways we can use platforms like LinkedIn. So I'm going to stop here. Hopefully this framework has been helpful for all of you as you, again, assess your brands. For Dodge & Cox, a relatively small shop, a focus firm, it's important reminder for us that relevance and reach also have to be considered along with reputation when thinking about differentiation and thinking about strengthening your overall business. So thank you very much, Mark, and I'll look forward to some questions.
Thanks very much, Steve. I think I'll pass it over now to Simon. Simon, if you want to just give a bit of an overview and in terms of how the firm is thinking about this topic.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark, and hopefully everyone can hear. Apologies, there's been a few technical issues at my end, but great to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and discuss some of the drivers, approach and considerations that are sat behind the rebrand of that's become Aberdeen. So first, just a quick bit of context. Standard Life Aberdeen has become Aberdeen as part of our rebrand. The history to that is Standard Life Aberdeen PLC was a corporate entity that housed 6 other brands. Standard Life in the UK, a leading life and pensions provider. Aberdeen Standard Investments, a global asset management business. Aberdeen Standard Capital, a discretionary fund manager. 1825, a financial advice firm, and Parmenion, a platform provider. All of these were products really that emerged between Standard Life and Aberdeen Asset Management 3 or so years ago. So our rebrand and our thinking, the way that we approach this, has really been triggered by a significant shift in corporate strategy, which includes the sale of the Standard Life brand as part of that journey. And it was one that looked to clean up the past, but importantly set a new direction. And a new direction which we sort of signaled to our clients and customers and key stakeholders in April this year. It was important because previously the brands that we had were seen as traditional and conservative. A lot of the coverage we were getting and perceptions was about whether we could find relevance for a business model of the past and something that was needed to get to the future. So the challenge is really to reframe in terms of what the business needs, and as a result of that, what the brand needed to do. So as I mentioned, and I think it's been sort of signalled through various parts of the conversation today, I think brand strategy is rooted deep in corporate strategy. For us, this was a significant transformation program. It was about the employer brand, it was about the distribution brand, and also about the investor brand. As sometimes thought, brand could be seen as a vanity project, but brand is definitely not a vanity project. It was deeply rooted in terms of brand becoming a strategic enabler to that corporate strategy. So we started our journey in terms of really trying to be clear in terms of what the business needs and then understand therefore what the brand needed to do, and that has fundamentally changed. We looked through the competitive landscape that many will be obviously clearly familiar with in terms of we need to win in a fragmented, consolidating and rapidly changing market. And as Steve mentioned, growing level of regionalisation in that market, the fee compression which we're sort of aware, and the barbell effects that we see across asset management, but also many industries. From a customer perspective, we needed to have a brand that actually had breadth in terms of reach to both attract and retain the different audiences for a distinct and evolving set of needs across the sort of what we call 3 growth vectors of our business, which is the asset management business, our advisor technology platform business, and our direct-to-consumer savings and wealth business. We also looked at a lens in terms of, from a company perspective, we had to massively simplify our operations, and we need to get a better communication of the whole of the sum of the parts. Having come through a period of significant sort of corporate action, we need to sort of redefine the ecosystem that our business has and the value that can deliver both to clients, customers, and shareholders, and also simplify that operation significantly. And really, really importantly, culture was a massive driver for us. The need to move to united culture that's sort of really conducive for progress and the ambition that the firm has under our sort of revised focus and strategy. But at its core, it's a fundamental need to simplify and optimize the client and colleague experience through singular brand clarity. We were looking for increased impact, marketing, distribution, return on investment, which we would target through a master brand strategy, and as a sort of cost effectiveness that's sort of associated with that tidying up the shop. So if that was the sort of vision and context for what we needed the brand to do, where were our aspirations? What we needed our brand to do was to stand out and stand for something. We need to look in terms of how we can make Aberdeen feel relevant to the different audience segments that we looked at. And we need to really convey the unique beliefs of the business and convey that 1 + 1 = 3. And as I said before, importantly, create alignment that can help drive change internally. So from that understanding, what we then sort of looked at is, okay, what are the implications for the brand strategy? And how much do we need to, or what can we do in terms of looking from an audit in terms of what we had so far, so we could build on our past and we could still point to authenticity, but also set something that was future direction, had a level of aspiration that would help drive the business forward. And with that, we kind of looked through the sort of four, what I would sort of consider sort of four main levers that we have available to us from a brand mechanism perspective. Firstly, the architecture. So our decision was to move to a mono-brand approach. We felt that would be simple and confident, and it presents a business united around Aberdeen, which in turn could stand for a core set of beliefs. And that would help us drive brand equity across our ecosystem, conveying the breadth and depth of the expertise in a way that helps our clients and customers find what they need. The second aspect was the brand story, the brand proposition. What is it that we stood for? What is it that we bring to clients and customers over and above the sort of specific product capabilities that we take to market? And this is about us building a new brand positioning point that's firmly based around client enablement and empowerment. This is something in progress and something that we're developing, but it provides the ability for us to define the business and tell a compelling story about the whole of what we do. It's about building more confidence and having a focused story after a period of fair confusion, and making sure that it drives a unique benefit that works across all the sort of product lines that we have as a business. The third element is really the name and the identity. Our decision was to utilize the derivation of the existing name as a way of signaling change, and then also amplifying that through the revised visual identity system that we brought through. Our aim with this was really to make sure that we felt distinctive, to be able to create cut-through, it felt new and it felt bold, but without feeling like the new kid on the block. So really helping to orientate people towards the future direction of where we're headed. And then the final part of the mix is really behaviours, which I think we've again sort of touched on in terms of both internally, in terms of uniting the global team to create excitement about the future, but it was also about helping to redefine a client experience process that would actually be the brand only really lives and breathes in terms of the experience that we give to our clients, and beginning to sort of translate our core brand proposition in terms of what that means for every touch point that we have across our client journeys, across the three sort of growth vectors that we have as a business. And our strategy has sort of provided a framework which allows us as a business to then start thinking about how we implement and how we consider different elements of that. Having just started in April, we've still got a fair journey to go on to build the brand and embed the brand. We've sort of taken a vessel and the direction in which we're looking to strive to deliver, and a sort of a framework to get there. But I guess where we are today, wrapping up so we can get time for questions, our journey has been about moving from 5 brands to 1, from moving from a period of disparity to clarity, from a lack of differentiation to creating something that has an element of disruption and distinctiveness, to making sure there's a single global digital experience driven by audience needs, and a brand positioning and proposition and tone of voice that is embedded throughout the end-to-end client experience. The aim is to sort of a single global brand that unites our business and provides a clear destination for the clients that we look to deliver to. And it's very much the start of a very exciting transformation journey. So on that, I'll pass back to Mark and open up some questions.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Simon. So yeah, a few questions. We've got a few minutes. I think the first one that I'd like to ask is, and Steve, maybe you can pick this one up. How do you train your sales and RMs on the consistent messages and attributes of your brand? So,
yeah, great question, and something that we work very hard on. And coming back to the remark I made on Ravel's Bolero, it's about repeating ourselves a lot. And perhaps we're at a bit of an advantage at Dodge & Cox, is that we are a pretty focused firm. We have a pretty small team out there meeting with our clients, and so that makes getting to alignment easier, but working in lockstep is critical, and starting with senior leadership is critical as well. So we're getting weekly emails now from senior management on what's going on around the firm. Those emails echo our key brand messages. They echo our brand strategy. the firm's overall strategy and culture as well. We get together regularly as a client service team to talk about what's going on, what's happening in the portfolios, what our business objectives are. We get together in smaller group meetings as well. I think it's, coming back to that book I mentioned, people are really good with stories as well. And I think we look to leverage the people who have been around the longest at the firm to tell the stories that they've lived throughout their career, which really echo, again, the culture and the brand overall. So it's a lot of work, Mark, but it's about telling those stories and getting together and sharing them internally so that we can share them consistently with our clients.
Very good. Thanks for that, Steve. Simon, a question for you, and this is related to use of various channels for brand building purposes. Obviously, there's a number of different choices. So the question is two-part. What are the most impactful channels for brand building purposes, and have some channels become relatively more important in the last few years?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think you kind of have to look at this in the world where, all channels are important. They play different roles at different sort of stages of the client acquisition and relationship management process. So I think it's impossible to sort of say some channels are more important than others. I mean, obviously from the asset management side of the business, face-to-face remains, such a key and predominantly the predominant sort of channel for a lot of the business that we look to do. So it kind of very much ties back to that earlier conversation in terms of how do we create an authenticity of our client experience and the relationship management approach, and get ourselves and fund managers and client teams to be performing in a consistent way, delivering the core messages and the core position that we sort of want as a business. But I say it's important that you kind of have to see that as a whole in terms of all our clients and prospects are normal human beings living in a normal world and influenced by many other forms of communication sort of channels. So inevitably that leads you to move to more digital channels in terms of way of reaching, engaging, and being present and living and breathing in the sort of the channels that they exist. And clearly during COVID, that's accelerated the importance of ensuring there's a intelligent and integrated sort of digital communication position. But you kind of, my short answer is that the real key is not which channel is more important, it's which channels are, or how do you integrate those channels effectively to manage a relationship in the round over multiple time periods.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. So we've got just 1 minute. We've got one more question I'm going to ask each of you, and maybe you can just kind of take 30 seconds, quick one or two things. So the question is about what brand mistakes have you seen? What are some of the potential pitfalls to avoid? So maybe one or two quick things. Maybe Steve, beginning with you, any experiences on that?
Well, maybe I speak to challenges. First, I think brand is an authentic reflection of your brand of your overall firm strategy, I should say, and your culture. And so you really need to have senior leadership buy in. This is not a marketing and communications team exercise. It's really integrated into the firm. So start there. Make sure that you're all on the same page with your overall strategy. And then I would recommend, looking at the research. We learned a lot through, the research we've got from Greenwich in the past. We've done some of our own studies on attributes, and you can really see, to your earlier point, Mark, how you stack up, both as clients think about you and how you stack up against your competition. So really, what is differentiating? And then I would say, make sure you have the right partners. For us, we rely on, firms outside of Dodge & Cox to help us along. And it's a big project, and again, integrated into the firm. So take it seriously and make sure that you're moving in lockstep across the organization.
Thanks for that, Steve. Simon, we're just about out of time. One thing, anything you might add to that? Any particular thing to focus on or to pitfall to avoid?
Pitfall to avoid, I'd say a lack of consistency. There's often a bigger driver internally to keep on trying to develop and change the messaging and change the positioning of what the firm brings to clients and customers. I would stick at it, and it probably goes to the keep repeat. These take a long time to build and secure a position within your client's mind. So set a direction and then stick to the course and reinforce.
Good. Well, thank you for that. Well, I want to thank both Steve and Simon. Thanks very much for your insights, and I hope you enjoyed the panel, and I'll hand it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Steve and Simon, for those interesting comments. Certainly, I think helpful frameworks for brand building. You can see that this is clearly no easy task, but as we saw in some of the data that Dave has presented, this is increasingly important in driving purchase decisions. So I think that's a really critical topic. I'm glad that we addressed it right at the start. One other thing I should mention, I always, when I listen to people's comments and conferences like this, I do take note of the books that people mention, and I'll just reiterate the book that Steve mentioned, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller, in case you didn't catch that. You want to write that down as well. So moving forward, we are now going to take a break for approximately 10 minutes. I think we'll stick to the schedule and make it an 8-minute break. Please, feel free to get a coffee top up or check your messages, but we will dive back in here at 11:15 promptly with our panel on investor engagement in a hybrid world. So see you in 8 minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. I think we'll get started. Hopefully you've had a chance to refresh your coffee, check your emails. Before we dive into this next panel, I just wanted to extend a note of appreciation to the Greenwich team that put this conference together, and in particular to Peter Lasarenza. You may not see Peter on the video screens, but Peter is the guy that's making this all work. And as it turns out, organizing a virtual conference is no less complicated than organizing an in-person event. So Peter, our hats off to you, and thank you very much. All right, so we'll dive right back in here to the content now. I'm gonna pass the baton over to my colleague, John Francione, to talk about the next topic here, engaging in a virtual world. So John, if you'd like to turn on your camera, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. So I'm John Francione. I'm the head of research for the investment management practice of Greenwich. And Andrew, if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm joined today by Onur Erzan, head of the global client group at AB, and Stefan Hasselwanter, senior managing director and head of the client group at Wellington. I will quickly kick off our panel discussion with a quick excerpt from one of our most recent global studies, and then Onur and Stefan will provide some perspective on the impact of the shift to a more virtual environment on their efforts to engage with clients and prospects over the past year and going forward into the future. So over the past summer, we conducted research on digital engagement preferences with 250 institutional asset owners in North America, Europe, and Asia, trying to understand a bit better how our clients in the asset management industry were impacted by this virtual environment and how asset managers have been able to engage with them either effectively or ineffectively. These excerpts are from our North American results, but our findings were quite consistent across the globe. So if you look on the top of this slide, you'll see that over 80% of investors found evaluating current managers for new mandates either as easy or even easier in a virtual environment than an in-person environment. But for new managers without an existing relationship with that client, more than half of asset owners found the virtual evaluations to be more difficult. Going forward, on the bottom of this page, you see that investors consistently expect to conduct initial pitch meetings and interim due diligence meetings with at least some virtual elements. However, the majority of asset owners expect final pitch meetings to go back to traditional in-person model, and very, very few are comfortable with final pitch meetings remaining fully virtual. As we think about the environment over the past year or almost 2 years now, obviously many things have had to change in the way that we engage with investors. And so I think it's important for us to think about what learnings will we take from this time that will continue into the future, and in what ways will we go back to a more normal pre-pandemic environment in the way that we engage with our clients. So with that as a kickoff, I'll hand it over to the real stars of the show. I'll virtually hand the mic to Onur now to talk to us about some of AB's initiatives to engage with clients in a remote world. Just one reminder first that for the audience, the Q&A is open throughout, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions throughout these sessions. Onur, over to you.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the introduction. I'll keep it brief before I hand it over to Stefan. I'll touch on a few themes: human touch, the speed, and the reach. Maybe starting with the first one, it's sort of a oxymoron, but I think that to us at AB, the biggest exciting thing about the remote environment was really discovering and exploring the human side. I think as an industry, we are very technical, we are very investment product and solution oriented. But I think that the learning is, particularly when we were hit with the pandemic back in early 2020, really engaging with the clients on a broader set of topics, ranging from mental health, creativity when you are working remotely, some of the broader behavioral finance kind of topics, and work-life balance. Those are the topics that really helped us to engage and connect with our clients at a different level beyond some of the more traditional, I think, investment content driven dialogue. So as I think about the lessons learned or some of the benefits of the challenging times we had, I think just really remembering that human touch, the human element, I think is key. And it's, again, a little bit of an oxymoron that we discovered it during a more remote environment versus a face-to-face environment. And the second piece is the speed. Maybe some other colleagues on the Zoom would agree. I don't think we have been necessarily a very fast-moving industry historically, but as I think about the pandemic and what it allowed us and maybe pushed us to do is to move faster. And I would pick two examples. One, at AB, we have been very successful in launching a couple of virtual roadshows in a very small amount of time, and we were able to get relatively non-disrupted time from our portfolio managers to go on the virtual road, quote unquote, and to engage with our clients. Probably at normal times that would have taken many more months to plan and many more months to execute. But I think we took a little bit of the risk and the incentive to move faster. Similarly, we moved to audio casts, which were weekly, and they were typically cross assets. Sometimes we went into more asset class specific topics. Again, we didn't want to invest too many days to create the video content. And we thought in fast moving markets, going to the market faster with insights is more important. And we got comfortable with the audio casts. And again, it goes back to a little bit of the speed elements of what we learned, and hopefully something that we can carry over to the more normal business environment. And then the last, but not the least, which I'm personally very excited about, is the reach. And we discovered the power of the scalability through technology, whether it's bringing the best of our teams, engaging with our clients by engaging different parts of the organization, whether it's the investment professionals, whether it's head of our diversity and inclusion, depending on the topic. So we were able to seamlessly bring the best of AB to our clients in a much better way. And then using another example, our Climate Academy that we launched in partnership with Columbia University allowed us to touch more than 1,000 clients, where we curated a 6-module climate risk training curriculum. And then we were able to certify more than half of those 1,000 clients through this virtual training program. And probably if we were to do that physically, I would be surprised if we were to get to 500 certifications and more than 1,000 clients getting engaged. I think that the power of the reach is incredible. Another, I think, big lesson learned for us. That being said, I think, John, as you shared in your opening slide, nevertheless, there are challenges. There are challenges in terms of client engagement in the remote or hybrid environments. I think there's definitely room for more innovation and creativity in prospecting. I don't claim that we have really cracked the code on that one. And then second, I think all of us have felt it at different levels at different time points during the pandemic and still feel it. I mean, there is this whole bombardment of Zooms and digital content. So how do you sustain that differentiation in a overly crowded, I think, Zoom and digital environment? I think that's going to be another challenge for us as an industry that we will navigate and hopefully innovate. So let me hand it over to Stefan.
Thank you, Onur, and thank you, John, for the introduction. I think a lot of the themes that you'll hear from me are quite consistent, or at least complementary with what you've highlighted. I guess I'll start out briefly by just setting the stage and giving you some stats on Wellington, just for context on the nature of our business. So we're about 1.4 trillion US in assets under management today. That's about equally split between traditional institutional and distribution or wealth business. It's about 70% US and 30% non-US, equally split between APAC and EMEA. And it's about 45% equity, 35% fixed, and then the rest is multi-asset and alternatives. So our business going into COVID was going quite strong, and then March 2020 hit, and everything took a nosedive. And frankly, my expectation was that our business would take a hit and that it would become very, very difficult to engage with clients. That's not how it played out. From a results perspective, the key success metric that I look at for the distribution organization is organic growth, net client growth, or net flows. And we had the best year in terms of net flows since 2015 in 2020. And this year is turning out to be actually better than that. So why is that? If we can go to the next slide, I'll share some observations and on that, and then on the future as well. You know, number one, I think in our industry, probably most of us would agree, is always going to be investment performance. But that's obviously not in our control on the distribution side of the business. What we can control is how we stay engaged with clients. And as I look at the stats, we actually not just stayed engaged, but increased our engagement through the pandemic, just with very, very different means. Technology, Onur already highlighted, played a hugely important role there. We were quite fortunate that we were able to leverage finally, after many years of efforts, clean Salesforce data environment, and use that. The volume of emails that we sent to our clients, just to give you one stat, went up over tenfold. Because distribution professionals started to really use the campaign functionality that they hadn't really used in the past. And the tool was much more helpful to them in terms of staying proactive, staying engaged. We also, I think, reached a tipping point, to use the subtitle of the conference, in terms of our use of digital media. Again, similar to AB. So podcasts, videos, social media, much more heavily used, and the pandemic forced us to do that. And so it's sort of silver lining there. And then we also were able to use technology to host virtual events, virtual seminars. Great success with some CIO roundtables, where we brought CIOs of our clients together to debate how the pandemic was affecting them and affecting us, from a managing the workforce perspective, from a managing sales and trading perspective, etc. So that was another way we were able to stay engaged. Trust is the second topic that I'll touch on. And John, your statistics were very interesting in terms of how asset owners were comfortable engaging virtually with existing managers more so than the new managers. That's very consistent with our experience. We were fortunate in that we have client relationships that in many cases were formed over decades, and we heard from many clients that they were comfortable continuing to allocate to Wellington because they knew us, and less the prospecting was much harder, similar for us than for you, Onur. And then time, I guess that trust was built over many years, but I think it has to be refreshed and replenished. And so as I now stand here 18 months or more into the pandemic, I kind of wonder how long as an industry we can sustain this. And I think we've probably reached a tipping point where we really benefit from going back into some level of in-person engagement. I don't think it'll be business as usual. And when I look at the future, I think we will never go back to that. I think it will be much more flexible in 3 different ways. And internally, in terms of how we manage our workforce, and this is a firm-wide comment, not just for the distribution organization, we have actually come out recently and said that every employee at Wellington will have 60% expectation of being in the office and 40% where they can decide where they want to work from. And that's going to be an entitlement. They don't need a special reason for that. I think that will be, in terms of managing the workforce, very helpful for us, because many of our employees value that flexibility and demand it going forward, frankly. Externally, I think we're also going to be a lot more flexible. And again, John, I think your stats were very interesting and quite consistent with what we're hearing, because I don't think we'll ever go back to the old days where for routine portfolio review, you might have gotten onto a 5-hour flight and then come back to the East Coast, for example. I don't think we'll ever do that again, but we will still really benefit from having in-person interactions where the value of those interactions is high. And finals presentations are one of them, but I actually also think conferences or relationship building meetings where you're able to sit down with a client over lunch or over a dinner and really get to know them in person, have that human touch, to use your term, owner. That will come back as well and really benefit us. And then the final point I'll make is that we'll need to be regionally very flexible, I think, because the path out of the pandemic is very, very different. I mean, for us right now, Hong Kong is pretty much back to business as usual. Obviously, you can't travel there, but within Hong Kong, it's pretty much back to business as usual. I think the US and the UK are not far behind that. But Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney are very close to the lockdown environment. And I think the path out of all this we'll have lots of twists and turns. So we'll have to remain flexible and go back and forth between in-person and hybrid and fully remote for quite some time. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stefan. That was it was very, very interesting to hear all the different elements and how you've broken it down, and thank you to Owner as well. Owner, I just wanted to start with, we are getting some Q&A questions, so I wanted to start with one for you that I thought of when you were talking at the end there. How have you and your colleagues combated the trend toward, for lack of a better term, Zoom fatigue, or the kind of virtual environment fatigue in your interactions with clients?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think it's anything that nobody has thought about, but I mean, it starts with the internal. We definitely try to avoid over allocation to Zoom, if you will, particularly on certain days. We implemented no Zoom days. That was, I think, helpful because I think some of it is sustaining your internal energy in addition to Zoom fatigue of the clients. I think second, as I mentioned, when it's appropriate, we use non-visual communication like the audio casts. Also, I think it allows people to access them on the run versus being stable to be able to watch or engage. And then I think the good old phone line works once in a while too. And then finally, whenever it's possible, I think those more casual lunches and getting outside outdoor environments, going for a walk with a client or doing that outdoor breakfast or lunch, I think those are the types of things that we have kind of implemented. So again, no silver bullets. However, I think, just kind of trying different ways and trying to keep that continuity while fighting the fatigue.
I know I've noticed internally with us over the last probably month or so, a lot more people with their videos off on just our normal internal calls, where 3 or 4 months ago, everyone had their videos on and was sitting in front of their computers, and now it's like, even if they're sitting in front of their computers, they're starting to turn it off. Like it's almost going back to conference calls. I think it does provide a little break every once in a while to not have to be on camera. Stefan, maybe following up on the end of your presentation there, one of the questions in the chat is, what have you learned about your team or your clients in a remote environment that may inform the way you run your business in the future?
Yeah, thank you, John. I think the number one thing that I would say we've learned about the team from a management perspective, guess I'll attack the question slightly differently. I think before we talked about remote work in our firm and I think across the industry for a very long time. And before the pandemic, we were split whether this could work or not. And there was I would say, a significant minority who had qualms about people performing their duties remotely without direct supervision, et cetera, et cetera. That has been completely dispelled. So I think the level of confidence and trust that we have in the team and in their ability to work from anywhere and do what's right for our clients from anywhere has never been higher. And I'm really proud of the team for having executed that way. And that's something that we'll take forward and implement as we come out of this. And in terms of our clients, I think Owner alluded to this before too, with respect to the human touch. We've gone through a crisis together, and we've had a window into each other's personal lives, home lives that we never had in the past. And that has allowed us to actually deepen relationships, strangely enough, where you thought that might be really hard to do remotely. So we've learned a lot more about what drives them, how they live, what challenges they face, in many cases the same challenges that we're all facing. And that has brought us closer together. And then from an investment perspective, the topsy-turvy environment of last year, first half of last year, I think brought the intensity of the investment dialogue to a whole new level. So the demand to have real-time investment intelligence with respect to what was going on in the market and advice on how to position portfolios has never been higher than in that period. And we learned a lot in that process about how our clients behave, what governance challenges they're facing, for example. And that again is something that we can build on as we move out of this.
Great, thank you very much. So we do have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to keep going back to the audience questions. So this one, I'll actually see which of you would prefer to answer it first, and maybe I'll try to get both your perspective here. The question was, isn't information overload a real challenge to our clients? So if all hired and prospecting managers are sending out more information, how does a client filter through the noise? Stefan, you unmuted first. Do you want to take the first crack? But I would be curious to get Onur your perspective as well.
Yeah, I agree with the premise on the question. I think it is a real problem. I guess one part of the solution, in my view, is technology, because we can use technology to deliver relevant content in a much more targeted way to clients. So where in the past we might have blasted out an email to everybody on the list, we now have lots of different lists, and relationship managers, business development professionals can opt in and out of certain pieces of content that are being distributed. And I think the variety of formats that we now have at our disposal helps too, because clients can consume the content in the format that works best for them.
Yeah, no, great points, Stefan. I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, as we know, clients are very sophisticated, and they're going to go to the content that they most value. So there's going to be a little bit of a natural selection that way. So as a result, I think credibility is important. Making sure you have a high bar in terms of what you put in front of them is important, because if they don't get satisfied with your earlier work, I think they won't probably open your next email or won't attend your next webinar. That said, I think probably there is a little bit more we can learn from the media industry in terms of how we curate the content, how we make it even more relevant. I think we are still in the early innings of that content creation and curation. We could also help our clients by making the content, I think, more easily accessible, more easily digestible. I think that's what I would end with.
Excellent. Another of the audience questions, I think, builds on that question of curation and how you get content to your investors. But the question was, has social media helped you stay connected to clients and prospects? And if so, how has it contributed to investor engagement? I know, not sure if you guys were on for Davis's keynote presentation or introductory presentation earlier, but talked about webinars and podcasts and emails being very popular with clients in terms of the most useful content to get from asset managers, but that a lot of asset manager clients don't seem to get as much value from social media. So just curious how your social media strategy has evolved, especially through the pandemic.
Yeah, again, I continue to believe there is a lot of room for innovation, and I think we should really tailor that to different audiences, right? An institutional investor is very different than an investment consultant versus a financial advisor or an end client in the retail context. So, I mean, if I stick to the more institutional side of things, given the audience, I would think the most relevant platform for us has been so far LinkedIn. Again, I don't think there's any magic there. And we've been, I think, investing more to get our LinkedIn strategy to be more fine-tuned in terms of what we put out there, how do we do the compliance on it, etc. So I mean, at least in our case, on the institutional side of things, it has skewed more towards LinkedIn and having a little bit more explicit focus on that. And I think to me that the silver lining is, I think our institutional relationship managers have discovered more on LinkedIn than before, right? In terms of being more proactive, in terms of really understanding the clients and listening to the clients, right? Because you can pick up cues from LinkedIn in terms of what the clients post or what they put on. They can be a little bit more tailored, if you will, in their outreaches. And Stefan might have other views as well.
I agree with that. I think that's exactly right. The key benefit of social media is the speed with which you get feedback. In my view, you put content out there and immediately you get feedback on whether people like it or don't like it, whether they share it or not share it. And so that's real-time information that's very, very valuable that we can then use in designing our content strategy going forward. So for us also, LinkedIn has been the platform of choice so far. We're pushing beyond that now, though. We have a presence on WeChat as well, which is very important in China. And then we're also experimenting, I would say, with Twitter and YouTube, beginning to do that.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And so I think this would be helpful to get both your perspective here. We talked a lot about client engagement. But this question is around prospects. So how have you leveraged technology to better target prospects and direct the efforts of the distribution teams?
I'll jump in just for given we are running out of time. But I would say for us, it has been more on getting to the basics on data, right? I wouldn't claim that we declared victory on it yet. But to me, the critical
Oner, I think we lost your connection there from it. Stefan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, the content, we think about content for clients and for prospects actually very, very, very similarly. We don't differentiate all that much, so we use the same technology. I think Oner was just going to talk about the importance of the clean data environment, and that's I second that completely. The tools like Salesforce are useless if they don't have clean data. So we spent a lot of time doing that and driving adoption internally. And now we're at the point where technology can be really useful in actually making our business developers, our managers better at their jobs. So where we can use that clean data now to give them pointers with respect to how they should be spending their time. So we're starting to put together what we know about our clients with what we can find, what we know from public sources, and the goal is to put all of that together and to sort of say, well, we know from a consultant database that client has manager X in their portfolio, and we know from another database that there's a search running, and so prompting a person to make a call that really good distribution professionals would always make, but we're just giving them another tool. So we're trying to get them to use technology more proactively rather than as a data repository, if you will.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, Oner, I'm not sure if you've rejoined, but we are.
I did.
Okay.
Apologies, for some reason it doesn't allow me to join the video. Probably somebody didn't like some of the things I said, but thank you.
No, well, I see Andrew's pop back up on the screen, which means that it's time to wrap up. But I would just like to extend our thanks to you, Oner, and you, Stefan, for your participation today, and best of luck to you as we continue to transition back into more of a sustainable hybrid model in the future.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, Oner. Really interesting comments, I think, given where we are today. I found it really interesting how, we're using technology to enhance, the human touch that they talked about, the speed of engagement, scalable reach. Obviously, the key will be trying to sort of extend those improvements into the post-pandemic world, and going forward, infused with greater flexibility and perhaps a return to some level of greater in-person interaction. We can all sort of cross our fingers for that. All right, so transitioning into our last panel for the morning, before we hear from our keynote speaker, we're going to discuss managing business strategy at a time, that is arguably the most complex and most fast-moving period that sort of any of us have ever experienced in our careers. So if I could ask my panelists to turn on their cameras. Great, I see Timer and Ralph, welcome. I am pleased to be joined by two experienced strategists and practitioners from, frankly, two very different businesses. Ralph Haberly, who leads the Institutional Retirement Client Group across sales, marketing, product management, and operations for U.S. defined contribution, pensions, and insurance at Capital Group. And in previous roles, he has been directly in charge of strategy. And Timer Hyatt, who's the Chief Operating Officer at PGIM and has global oversight for strategy, thematic research, operations, and innovation, marketing and communications. He also oversees the Institutional Advisory and Solutions Group, which provides portfolio level advice to institutional clients globally. So you both have extensive responsibilities here for business management and strategy. And for what it's worth, I'll say that both of them are recovering management consultants from earlier in their careers. Welcome both. We are delighted to have you. I know this is going to be a really interesting discussion. Before we get started, and I ask each of you to make a few opening remarks, if you will, let me just provide a little bit of context, I think, for our conversation here today. It's been my observation that the emphasis on strategy in corporate America ebbs and flows over time. But I'd like to suggest that strategy has never been more important than it is right now in the asset management industry. And that's for two reasons. First of all, as I think we all realize, our industry is squarely in the maturity phase of the industry life cycle. So gone are the heydays of the 80s and 90s where asset growth was relatively easy as long as you had a compelling investment thesis and a competent sales team. This was also, of course, the period when many of the firms that we know to be great today really kind of got their footing and solidified their strategic positions. But in a mature market where we find ourselves today, growth is not so straightforward. And so you can see some of the challenges of mature industries in the right-hand side of this page. So demand slows, buyers become more demanding, competition rises, and cost and service begin to overshadow innovation. The second reason that I would argue that strategy matters so much today is that asset managers are just simply bombarded by strategic challenges. I've listed out some of the issues here today, but some of these issues are environmental, right? So interest rates, inflation, COVID. Others relate to shifting client needs, business management challenges, investment trends, technology requirements. Frankly, any one of these issues, if they presented themselves as a standalone, would be challenge enough. But when they all hit at once, managing a business and designing strategy is really complicated. It's no easy task. So how do they do it? Let's ask the experts. So Ralph and Timer, if maybe I could ask you to share a few of your perspectives. And I guess I'll start with Ralph, just going alphabetically by last name. Over to you, Ralph.
Andrew, thank you. And it's great to be here with everybody today and to spend a couple minutes on what I would very much agree is an important topic and one that I'm going to guess touches all of us on this call in various ways. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about how we approach this topic at Capital Group. As I was reflecting on this and reflecting on the last couple of years, there are sort of two things that kept coming up, and I think that is a theme that's going to cut through certainly what I'm going to share today. And it's two concepts that feel like they're at a bit a bit opposite ends. There's a bit of a tension there, and so the first is, more than ever before, we think value in a long-term, durable, consistent view of strategy. So really to be anchored in where you're going, that true north, more important than ever. On the other end of the spectrum, and we've all lived this and continue to live it, that strategy absolutely must be an enabler to respond quickly, real time, and with agility to both known and unknown things that are coming at us all the time. So that tension of, on the one hand, a really long-term, consistent view of a strategic true north, but then that imperative for that being an enabler and a bit of an anchor to make very real-time decisions, I think is a theme that that is going to run through my comments here. So what I've pulled together is a bit more of the long-term view of that in these this page and the next page that we'll share from how we approach this at Capital, and then we'll make a couple comments on the other side of that spectrum on how we've applied it real time. So what you see here is really the product of some work we did at Capital. Just probably about 3 years ago, so very timely in hindsight of heading into this period of just sitting back and re-underwriting, and it's largely a re-underwriting what we thought really our durable competitive advantages were as an organization. I'm not going to go through them here. In some respects, there's nothing here that's all that revolutionary, but it is all very intentional. Intentional that it highlights culture, people, investment process, how we go deep with clients. Those are all things that that we feel are our durable competitive advantages, and we really want to stay true to and be anchored to, and not get into things that are going to take us too far from that. So starting with durable competitive advantage, then if you could advance to the next page, this really is how we distilled that down into what we term as our long-term strategy. It's not an accident at all that it starts on the left there with mission, and really grounding ourselves in Capital's mission. And Capital is turning 90 this year, so this is a mission which has been around for a while and has had some durability through a series of environments, some probably frankly more challenging even than what we've seen in the last couple of years. And that mission has evolved a bit, but it's been remarkably consistent. On the right, again, I'm not going to go through the specifics here, but this is that consistent true north that we have across all parts of our organization as to where we're headed. Growth, operating in a way that's economically responsible, data and technology explicitly called out, certainly investment results, and at the center of this of the picture there, our associates, our values, and our culture. So that really is the one end of the spectrum on consistent long-term approach, and that anchor that really drives both overall strategy at Capital. And then as we look at the work we do with retirement and institutional clients, this is where we start. And we then translate from this how we're getting after specific actions and specific strategies at a more localized level. I'd say one observation in the current environment that I'd share is that the trends broadly actually have been very predictable. So we talk about technology, we talk about going virtual, we talk about things like consolidation, fee compression. Those are all things that were very real, I'd say probably for all of us 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So we have almost been surprised how we've not been surprised by what's come down the pike. We have been very surprised by the pace, the speed, even the ferocity of how those trends have played out. So that's really, we're having that anchor of, okay, we know where our strategy long-term is, we know where we want to head. Very helpful in making and being forced to make pretty quick, pretty agile, cross-functional, close to client decisions on how we now adapt real time and adapt less to new things coming down the pike, but how much further and how much mature they got, those trends got very quickly. So again, that premium on speed, on agility, and ultimately on execution And that last word, I think, critical. Strategy must be that enabler, not only where to focus, but how to execute, was really put to the test over the last stretch for us. The point I'll end on before I hand it over to Timer here is people and talent. And it's, again, as we've looked at the environment, the ability to react quickly, to make judgment calls, to have a framework of how to do that, so important. Ultimately, that is just an enabler to those leaders across the organization that are ultimately tasked with making those decisions, and having very strong cross-functional, broadly experienced, not necessarily from tenure only, but also from having seen multiple different parts of the business in different ways, having that talent in key decision-making roles and having those much closer to the front lines has been I think a key learning for us, and highlighted again how important that is. So with that, I'll stop my remarks. Look forward to unpacking that certainly with some Q&A, but Timer, will hand it over to you.
Sure. If you can advance to the next slide, I think there's, despite the differences in the two firms, lots of similarities in our approach to strategy. But to make it fun, Andrew, for the conference participants, I'll focus a little more on maybe the more granular aspects of strategy in terms of rolling up sleeve strategy, what it looks like. Bit of background, I think it's sort of relevant to how we approach strategy at PGIM. We really combine at PGIM depth with scale. And the depth comes from having a series of asset managers. Each owns an asset class, fixed income, quantitative equities and asset allocation, fundamental equities, real estate, private credit, and so on. That specializes in that one area, is fairly autonomous, and really are run like small partnerships, like small private partnerships, where a group of people decide their destiny, own their investment processes. We don't have a house view. And yet, and this is where strategy comes in as well, are increasingly looking for the benefits of scale in a world that's more and more in lots of sectors, including asset management, a winner-takes-all world, where there are advantages to scale as well, at the same time as keeping that craft-like autonomy of the investment process and active investment management. Our clients demand it as they look for a consolidated set of relationships with asset managers. Technology demands it, as you need to make bigger and bigger investments in alternative data, in the right data architecture, in the next wave of digital transformation. The compliance and regulatory environment has grown more complicated around the world. And as you serve these clients, building the right quality of compliance and regulation demands it. And then, of course, there are more retail platforms and vehicles that require having something that's centralized and at scale. So really, the secret of PGIM and of our strategy team is how do you balance depth and the purity of that model with scale where you need it? And we can unpack that more when we go into the discussion later on. Against that backdrop, maybe if we can turn to the next page and the last page, I'd say like what Ralph laid out, the bedrock of our strategy house is delivering superior risk-adjusted returns to clients. 93% of our AUM has outperformed benchmarks over the 3, 5, and 10-year period. And that's really the heart of where we start our process and think, okay, how do we sustain that? But also, where else do our clients want us to go? Where else are we credible to take that investment journey? Where do clients want to have a relationship with us to provide something? And the list of things that we don't do for our clients because we think somebody else can do a better job, passive is one example, single manager private equity is another, is quite a long list. I think it's important in strategy to say what you're not doing as much as what you're doing. But there are 4 areas that we focus on. One is globalizing our footprint. When I joined about 8 years ago, we were about 15% non-US client assets, and we are now closer to 28, 30% non-US. But there's still lots of room to grow our client franchise in Europe and Asia in particular. The second piece is broadening our investment capabilities. And asset management is strange. It doesn't seem like it's changing from one day to the next, but as Ralph said, over time, those client changes and allocations and interests do add up. And I think pivoting our business more into private asset classes. We already have 280 billion in alternatives, real estate, private credit, mezz, private equity secondaries. But continuing that pivot, going on that journey with our clients has been key in terms of broadening our capabilities. Enhancing our brand and reputation has been another piece. I think 5 years ago, when we took on the PGIM name, I think a couple of people quipped that you're probably the least known 1.5 trillion asset manager in the world. And I do think institutional brand matters now, and building that and being recognized for something, which in our case is sort of being active, being global, having both public and private expertise is important, and that's a priority. And finally, it's acquiring new capabilities. I think the beauty of our model is we can add bolt-ons without disrupting what is working well in our businesses, and really linking it to where our clients want us to go on that journey. And we did something in private equity secondaries, and there are a couple of very specific areas where we do feel it sort of makes sense to be part of the PGIM family. Maybe I'll end with a couple of more sort of roll up your sleeves comments around how our strategy function works in the bigger context of PGIM. One, I think we've largely left the terrain of, it's big and growing, which we leave to the management consultants. Most asset management profit pools are big and growing. And our focus is much more, where do we have a competitive edge and how do you execute? So it's much more strategy with a small s rather than strategy with a capital S. And it gets pretty granular into investment performance, into talent structures, into how do you kind of design something that works in the system. And it also doesn't end with just, let's launch the ship and see where it goes. We stay very much involved as a strategy function in helping and guiding those ships arrive at their destination as well. So I think that's kind of one difference that's been quite successful. I'd say a second is our strategy function is not focused on owning initiatives. In fact, many people are people who didn't really want to do the selling part of being in a consulting company, but really wanted to drive an initiative. So the biggest success for us is as an enabler, to Ralph's point, where the business drives something and we just help guide them there. We only step in, and it's a small team of sort of 5 people, really focused on the highest priority initiatives, because the goal is, again, let's drive outcomes ideally owned by the business, not try and own everything ourselves. And keeping it small sort of focuses not on winning client projects, not winning new initiatives, but driving success in the business. And then third, we don't stop at the front office. I think it's increasingly critical for a strategy team to understand technology, to understand the middle and back office, to understand efficiencies. And that made us very successful, for example, in being part of the journey at PGIM when we pivoted with COVID-19 into issues such as business continuity planning. How do you retain talent? How do you create a COVID dashboard? So I think kind of really having a team that understands the entire asset management journey is quite critical for a modern strategy team. Having said all that, I think not just at PGIM, but across the asset management industry, strategy has moved from this sort of ambiguous, shadowy, abstract term that just a few people had to pretty much being considered a critical function that every large asset manager either has or considers. And in my view, most cutting edge CEOs think that having a chief strategy officer is as essential as having a chief financial officer.
Great. Well, thank you both for those comments. I think that's a really, really helpful starting point to answer some of these questions. One of the questions in the Q&A, and one of the things that did not come up in either of your comments, was corporate development, or M&A. Now, neither of your organizations have been terribly acquisitive in the past, so maybe I can just direct this question to one of you, and I'll choose Timer if you'd like to comment on this. At what point do you consider M&A to solve strategic challenges? And I like this part of it. Does it ever work?
So, I think asset management, as the question alludes to, is littered with the history of deals that have sort of destroyed value for the talent involved, and if it's a public company, for the shareholders. But I do think it can work. And I think there have been two kinds of acquisitions in the marketplace. I think as scale matters, really, the industry is bifurcated into small, nimble companies and large global firms. And those who've been stuck in the middle realize they haven't had the resources and scale, below $1 trillion to really achieve success, and they're getting left behind. And you've seen a lot of consolidation. The bankers talked about this to us, Andrew, for a decade, but it's finally happening. And I think we've all seen a spate of these in Europe and the US. The PGIM approach has been a little different, and I think quite recent. You're right. Our last really major acquisition was over 30 years ago when Jennison joined the PGIM family as a fundamental growth in our global equity manager. But we have recognized that there's specific capabilities where we look first to see whether we can build them out ourselves. And we've discovered that probably having the track records, the expertise is helpful in meeting our client needs. And largely we found them in our case in areas where each of our specialist managers sort of owns everything in that asset class, but where we are not present. And in our case, to pick two examples, one was private equity. And we really had to link M&A and corporate development with strategy. And we said, listen, a single manager private equity, there are already great firms out in the industry who do that with great performance. And there probably won't be a good cultural fit and won't be happy sitting within PGIM. We also looked at private equity fund of funds, and with due respect to our private equity fund of fund colleagues, we sort of saw that as a bit of a falling knife in terms of pricing, and also saw sophisticated institutional investors move away from fund of funds to actually co-investments and direct private equity. And we figured private equity secondaries is the way to enter the journey. And then we began a conversation with the 10 highest investment performing firms around the world. It was a multi-year conversation. And earlier this year, we did find a partner in Montana Capital Partners. It's based in Zurich, 3 billion in AUM, but allows us to participate in the private equity secondary side. And we are looking at certain elements within infrastructure equity, for example, as another area where we can build on a pretty big infrastructure debt and infrastructure mezz business. So it's pretty select for us. It's multi-year in approach. It has to be deeply connected with strategy. And my big advice, have as long a list of things that you're not tempted by and things that you're not good as the small set of things where you feel you can bolt on something and be additive to your clients.
Good. Well, Ralph, I won't make you answer that one because I think it's probably been even longer that Capital was acquiring somebody. But maybe I can come back to a comment that you made. You were surprised at how little you were surprised at some of the things that had happened, and in particular, you mentioned fee compression. And this has been a challenge for many firms for many years. How does the industry trend related to fee compression impact your thinking about strategy moving forward?
Yeah, so thank you for not making me answer the prior question. We're still waiting for our first acquisition after 90 years, so it would have been a short answer. So fee compression is a really interesting one, and again, one that we all struggle with, in that it's the output of so many of the dynamics going on in the industry. A lot of them, frankly, really positive for clients. So the fact that we are driving scale, the fact that you can access services at higher scale fees, and that gets passed through, ultimately is a benefit to pensioners, is a benefit to participants in DC plans. So it's this topic sort of hovers behind a lot, has some real benefits to it, but also is in many respects sort of the tricky, challenging, well, how do we get a positive out of what really feels like a negative as these trends come together? We've talked about scale, we've talked about size. I mean, you're talking to two folks on this panel that both have the benefits of scale and size. So depending on the day, we're right around 2.5 trillion in terms of assets at Capital. About a third of that really what we would term as institutional and retirement. So that gives us some real advantages on just the good old fashioned scale side of it, and making sure that we're very conscious of driving scale, driving efficiencies, even if we already think we're efficient, and having that front and center at all times. There's another side of the fee compression piece, which we've also really started to focus on and focus on as an active manager. So if you really want the lowest cost, there's ways to get that, which are remarkably low cost. We think that this balance between fees and value, cost and value, is a really important one, and one that we've gotten quite proactive on. Of yes, being very low cost, making sure we pass through efficiencies, but also very deliberately investing in the value that clients get from working with capital, and that's value both in the investment results that we deliver, certainly, but also value from a broader relationship and partnership of working with us. And that's an area where, especially as reports like yours and others show that sort of very steady move towards passive, we think there is another side of that story, and it is around value and finding places to really reinvest some of the fees that we do get from clients, reinvest that into areas that are going to drive ultimately value for outcomes in a way that, frankly, if you're a passive manager charging a basis point, 2 basis points for an equity strategy, you're not able to provide that same value in the same way. So it's a fascinating topic, fees, that brings a lot of different components together that we've touched on in this session, and certainly we'll touch on in this conference. But it is a bit of this balance, if I were to boil it down, of being very conscious of driving scale at all points. That's not optional, but also being a bit on offense, of finding ways to drive some value to make sure that it is low cost but high value.
The only thing I'd add to that is, I've been a little surprised at the pace at which performance fees in the traditional long-only world have how long it's taken for that to take off. We have some institutional clients who want it, and I understand the complexity of fulcrum fees in the retail space and so on. But it is interesting how many clients kind of value stable fees rather than a low base fee and a performance fee, and how that hasn't been one way that this notion that Ralph presented, which I completely agree with, which is we should pay for every unit of alpha that's generated, but not otherwise, hasn't taken off more in the industry. And also a bit of the bifurcation between the fact that I think on the alternative and private asset classes, you've seen much less fee pressure than on the public side.
Do you think that's coming, Timer? Do you think it'll increase in the future?
I think sectors that can be ETFized easily and therefore have a new reference price are more the traditional asset classes where I see the pressure. And ironically, in all this, the fastest race to zero actually has been on the ETF side, as now evidenced by some of the talked about M&A corporate development moves that have resulted from the pressures of the race to zero on ETF. So I think everybody's looking for value for money. But I see it continuing more on the passive and traditional side still so far.
We've talked about scale, and there's clearly benefits to scale. I think there's some downside to scale too, which is the ability to move quickly and nimbly. You both work for very large organizations. So do you have any advice for helping people at other big organizations respond quickly to emerging issues that confront the firm? Maybe Ralph, I can start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I'll go back to highlight a couple of the points I made in my comments up front, and perhaps start with people and talent. I think that people and talent more important than it's ever been, and having talent that brings a breadth of experience, a bit of a multi-dimensional view of things. Someone who understands how to engage with clients, is more than just technology literate, understands how to think about a problem from a marketing perspective or to engage with marketers, is certainly technically very well versed in investment process. That sort of multi-dimensional skill set is something that we're increasingly focused on, and it is in part with a view to exactly what underpins your question. How do you in a large organization operate quickly? And we think that is about taking the big, finding those common points of scale. For us, it's not a multi-boutique model, but we do cover a wide range of clients. Just in the institutional retirement client group, we work with startup 401k plans all the way through some of the largest pensions in the US. We don't cover them in the same group. We divide and subdivide how we go to market, and then and then really aim to have strong talent that's close to client, close to problem, that can approach that multidimensionally. And then, yeah, look to give them the empowerment, accountability to drive a lot of things at a more localized level. So I'm sure, Tamer, you've got other perspectives you'd add to that, but that's the one I would highlight, I guess, amongst the thoughts I'd have on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great list, Ralph, and I think talent is kind of key. Maybe a couple of other ideas. We try to not let the great be the enemy of the good. In large organizations, there are lots of views. Things can get caught up in the swirl, and I actually think the strategy function can be very good in sort of changing things from a discussion on a topic to a decision that needs to be made, and a gated series of decisions. So structure is good, and I've seen even investment professionals and others who would love kind of talking for an hour about something do value that structure and kind of here are some decisions we need to make to move things forward. So you can cut through that swirl with a good strategy function. I think that's critical. I think involving legal and compliance and finance, some of the areas that might get left behind, and then come in late with a series of questions that kind of bring a whole, a new idea kind of potentially crumbling. I think bringing them in early, making them feel part of the process, kind of getting them sort of syndicated early on to kind of owning the strategy is a good way to get a large organization working. Obviously, our model helps because instead of having one CEO who needs to do everything, we have 6 different heads of businesses who can drive things in each area and kind of leveraging that so that we don't overload one person, but kind of use all those areas to get multiple things going as well. I'd say informal channels are as key as formal ones. There's always the risk committees and the structures, but kind of informally kind of keeping that dialogue going so people are aware. They're not surprised when you say, let's look at China. They understand that there are political risks to China, but at the same time, many of our clients are saying, in fact, as the US and China bifurcate politically, we cannot get access to China growth through ADRs or US companies. And actually, we need to deepen our expertise in China, whatever the end security or asset class decision is. Kind of having people aware of that ecosystem of what clients are thinking makes them much more nimble, I think, when an idea comes about to act on it. So there's sort of an awareness role, I think, that strategy plays as well.
Okay, great. Well, Ralph and Tamer, I think we're at our time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on strategy development and execution. We really appreciate it. I think for me, this discussion kind of really drove home that having the right strategy is important, but, given the many simultaneous challenges that we're all facing, executing that strategy in an efficient, yet high quality way is really what's going to separate winners from losers. So appreciate you sharing your ideas with your peers here today. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to spend some time with everybody today.
Likewise.
All right. Well, at this point, I'd like to shift to our last speaker of the global session. Adam, if I could ask you to turn on your camera.
I think I just did that.
All right. Hello, I see you.
Excellent.
Adam, what I'm going to do is actually stop sharing my screen so that people can actually see us. Hopefully they can do that now. Great. So hopefully everybody has just you and me on their screen at this point. So I'm Adam, maybe I'll just start with a bit of an introduction for you, and then I have a whole series of questions that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay.
Fire away.
All right. So I'm pleased and honored to introduce Adam Spector. Adam is our keynote speaker here today. Adam is the Executive Vice President and Head of Global Distribution for Franklin Templeton. This means that he's responsible for global retail and institutional distribution, including marketing and product strategy. You may think that is a full-time job, but not for Adam, because in addition to his role as Head of Global Distribution, Adam is also the managing partner of Brandywine Global, where he's responsible for the overall management of the firm, including infrastructure, legal and compliance, business strategy, sales, and client service. So just to give a little bit more background, prior to Franklin Templeton's acquisition of Legg Mason, Adam had been at Brandywine since 1997. So that's where he spent the majority of his career. He's also had senior roles at SEI Investments and Ameritech Business Systems, which was an entrepreneurial venture in Prague. We could probably spend a whole nother hour on that topic. Adam earned his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, has a BA in Public Policy and Anthropology from Brown, where he graduated magna cum laude and was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. Also, you can see Adam's nice background there. He's coming to us from his home in Utah, where he spent much of his time during COVID. I suppose Utah is somewhere in between Philadelphia and San Mateo. So, Adam, thanks for joining us. We're delighted to have you.
Appreciate the opportunity, Andrew.
So, Adam, I don't know if you heard my opening comments a couple hours ago, but I mentioned that I think you, perhaps more than anyone in the industry, sit at the nexus of a lot of the topics that we're talking about here in this conference. And so there's lots of different places or directions we could take the conversation, but maybe where I'll start is with your dual roles. So you spent the majority of your career at a boutique, Brandywine, but you now lead distribution for one of the industry's largest firms, Franklin Templeton. So how has that change in vantage point affected your approach to management?
I think like any person who gets a question, the first thing to do is to change it so you can answer it in a way that's easier. So to me, if you ask how's it changed management, what I'd say is management is really about communication. So I would say the biggest difference to me between a smaller boutique firm and a larger firm, and Franklin has over 10,000 people, is really how you need to communicate. And through communication, manage. At a small firm where you know people, you have social connections, generally you've been working together for years, and there's just a very clear, distinct sense of mission across the entire organization. You can manage and communicate with nudges and winks much more effectively. When you're working across 10,000 people in 35 countries, nudges and winks just don't work. You need to be far more explicit about what you want to accomplish and how you think you're going to get there when you don't have that same history and kind of natural connectivity. I've been at Franklin Templeton for a year now, and I still have a number of people on my leadership team that I've never met in person. That just means you need to be a lot more explicit, and you need to spend time pounding again and again what your sense of mission is and what you believe the 2 or 3 strategic drivers of success are going to be. And that really lets other people kind of self-organize around those central themes, because in a large organization, you can't do it all the way or kind of touch everything the way you can in a small organization. So I think laying those things out clearly about the mission, the success drivers, and repeating them again and again is much more important in a large organization. The best example I gave folks about that was a story, it might be apocryphal, it might not, I don't know, about when President Kennedy visited the space station and the Space Center and said to the janitor late at night, why are you here? What are you doing? He said, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon, right? There was a clear sense that everyone was working towards the same goal. I think establishing that sense is really important in larger organizations.
Good. Well, let's stick with this topic of, I guess, communication, and maybe I can take it to the topic of structure. Franklin Templeton is a public company with family leadership. Brandywine was a partnership. There are other models that different firms use. Do you think structure is important? And do you think there are advantages to the Franklin structure?
I think structure is really important. But what I'm not going to fall into is a statement that there's one structure that's superior, whether that's Brandywine's or Franklin Templeton's. There's almost as many different structures in this industry as there are firms. And I think if you look at them as boutiques and partnerships versus public companies versus bank or insurance owned, we've seen successes with every type of model, and we've seen failures with every type of model. So to me, what I try to do is think about the successful models. What do they have in common? And I think it's one thing. I think it's that those firms are able to focus on the long term. Our business is inherently a long-term game. It's not a quarter-to-quarter game, no matter what the analysts want to say, no matter what Wall Street wants to say. It's a long-term game. And I think there's a reason that a number of clients may be drawn to kind of partnership or boutique structures, because there's an assumption that there's more alignment of interest with that longer-term focus. But you can have that in any type of firm. I think the most important thing about the structure of a firm is that it kind of incents longer-term capital allocation and gives portfolio managers the contextual leeway to make bold decisions in their portfolios and to invest with a longer-term focus. At Franklin Templeton, we're a big company, but we're also a company that has significant family ownership, which leads to kind of a multi-generational long-term focus. So I think it's not about the structure, it's about the time frame.
How do you incentivize long-term thinking?
You know, I think it's kind of simple in some ways. You get what you pay for. You know, that's a pretty simple maxim. And I think when you look at your compensation systems, you have to understand, are you rewarding quarter-to-quarter behaviors, or are you rewarding long-term behaviors? I think that your incentive system has to be aligned with your client's time frame. And you have to make sure the entire organization understands that, and that people don't feel like their success is going to be defined based on one quarter's results. And I think really that's my job. That's the job of all of us as senior managers in the industry, is to make sure that we have the right incentive systems in place, the right cultures that really inform that long-term decision making. And you know, I think when we have prospects and clients and consultants coming to visit and talk with us, that's one of the things they probe on, because I think there is an understanding that that's going to be one of the determinants of longer-term success.
Okay. I don't mean to stick with the structure topic too long, but why do you think and I know you said any approach or structure can work, but why do you think the multi-manager approach will work at Franklin when it really hasn't worked particularly well in other places?
So to me, the success of the multi-boutique or multi-affiliate model is really dependent upon why one is creating that model, one, and two, making sure there's buy-in. So the multi-boutique model can work really well when there's a focus on implementing it in order to drive better investment outcomes by really taking duties and responsibilities and work off of the investment teams, or taking commodity-like activities off of the relationship teams and centralizing those. So you're trying to get better investment outcomes, better client outcomes. I think if that is the focus of what you're doing, you're going to have a much higher chance of success than if you go at this with an approach that says, I'm going to implement this because I can slash costs, create synergies, drive efficiencies, et cetera. It's not to say that there can't be efficiencies and synergies, but if you're doing this as a way to boost your earnings and cut cost, I think it's much less likely to be successful than if you're doing it because you think there are simply some advantages to scale. There are advantages to building massive data lakes in the center of the organization. There are advantages to having local offices in multiple countries. If you focus on the advantages as opposed to the cost synergies, instead of trying to squeeze your investment teams, I think you're going to be much more likely to be successful. The other thing I found is that you really need to have alignment and buy-in. If you have commitment at the investment team or the affiliate or SIM level, end commitment at the center to the same model, and everyone wants the same things done locally and the same things done in the center, then it works. If those groups are battling with each other, it won't work. I think at Franklin, back to your question, why will it work? Everyone is bought in on the model, and it is very explicitly designed to get to better client and investment outcomes.
That makes perfect sense. So I'll change directions here.
Okay.
So there used to be sort of a dividing line in asset management between institutional and retail, but increasingly, as has been mentioned several times today already, those lines are blurring. So do you think this distinction still has meaning?
I think there are some ways where the two segments are still quite different. And in some ways where if you go into the retail business thinking it's easier or less sophisticated, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because it's simply not that. I think we all have an understanding that on the institutional side of the business, you need to be a capital markets expert. You need to know your products inside and out. You need to be a student of macroeconomics. You need to understand your competitive advantage, all of those things, be solutions oriented, all the things that are typical in the institutional market. By the way, you need to do all of those things in the retail market as well. There's no difference. The retail market is controlled by highly sophisticated, centralized asset allocation or asset allocators who are every bit as sophisticated as the big institutions and the big investment consultants on the institutional side. So I think that sophisticated approach, you need to have it and you need to deliver it on the retail side. The problem is on the retail side of the house, it's not enough. It's not less than institutional, it's institutional plus. You also need to have a brand that resonates. You need to make sure that you manage the business relationship with the sponsor firms. You need to have effective representation in a segmented way in the field. You need to bring kind of a value outside of or in addition to your investment value to these partnership firms and treat them as real business partners. So to me, retail is not a rung below institutional, it's really institutional plus.
Interesting. So there's been lots of discussion so far today about shifting investor needs. How do you see investor needs shifting and how is that impacting asset managers?
You started off in the intro saying I've been in this since the early 90s. I don't think I've seen 2 years in a row where there hasn't been a shift in investment desire or trends among their clients. That being said, I would say now there's probably 2 or 3 bigger waves that I think are really important for us all to focus on. And none of these probably are going to sound all that new to people, but I think you can't underestimate their importance. Number one on that list for me has got to be ESG. If you've been doing business in Europe or Australia or some other places outside of the US over the last number of years, I think you've seen how it's grown. And in our conversations in those locales now, the ESG conversation and ESG integration and impact and sustainability, those conversations are as important and sometimes more important than the alpha discussion with our clients there. So ESG is important. I think we all realize it, but I don't think everyone appreciates how central it will be to everything we do in the business. So ESG would be one theme. I'd say a second is alternatives. People have been talking about alternatives for years. But if you think about where equity market valuations are now, where interest rates are now, the need for a lack of correlation in our portfolios, I think there's a real argument for alternatives being even more important at this point in time. Traditionally, alternatives, we saw them start with big allocations in the endowments, then into the pension market, into the ultra high net worth. what I see over the coming years is that alternatives are going to become more and more important in the pure retail space, and firms that are able to really democratize access to alternatives are going to be successful. Final theme I would hit on is mass customization. If you think about our lives in general, right? You expect you can tap on your phone and get on Spotify and get music that's absolutely customized to your taste. That if you get a book recommendation from Amazon, it's going to be spot on with what you like. I think the ability for managers to customize to their clients en masse is going to be really important. And if we're going to do that for each and every customer, it's going to need to be technology driven, which means that the cost of being in the business, the capital costs, the barriers to entry are just going to rise, especially if we say we want to have mass customization, but we also want to do that in alternatives with customized ESG integration. You put those three themes together, and I think that's a pretty significant shift in the industry.
Absolutely. So shifting from client needs to business management, let's talk about office reopenings. So conventional wisdom is that people managers are eager to get back to the office, but the workers want to stay at home. Do you think that's generally right or wrong?
So Brandywine's a value manager, and value managers don't like to go with conventional wisdom in general. But guess what? I'm going with conventional wisdom here. I think that's kind of spot on. I can just tell you as an employee, I'm working from Utah right now and have been for much of COVID, even though, Brandywine is headquartered in Philadelphia and Franklin is in San Mateo. I'm in the middle, so we could argue that's why we're here, but I'm really here because I enjoy living here. I enjoy not commuting 45 minutes a day each way to Philadelphia. So as an employee, I really do appreciate the flexibility, and I'm not jonesing to run back to the office right away. I feel very differently as a manager, though. As a manager, I think it's really important to get our teams back into the office. If I look at the way I connect with people over Zoom, over Teams, it works really well for that kind of intentional communication. So I feel that I can collaborate really well with the people I'm directly reaching out to. So I have great relationships, great communication with, say, senior portfolio managers. Do I have that level of connectivity with the analysts on the team the way I once did? Absolutely not. Do I speak to the regional sales managers all the time? Absolutely. With the individual salespeople? No. It's just harder to have those short conversations, but those short conversations, that serendipity, that's what really kind of knits, to me, the social fabric of a firm. That's what enables broad communication. And I think without having that kind of that web of relationships really strong, you become a more hierarchical organization over time. Information tends to flow more vertically. You become more siloed. So I think that's dangerous for an organization over a period of years. I think for a period of 1, 2, 3 years, however long this is going to be, I think we can all do our jobs effectively remotely. But at the end of the day, to be really successful, I think we're going to need to be back in the offices in some type of a hybrid form, at least, to create those webs of communication. That being said, when we go back to the office, I think you have to be pretty intentional about why you're in the office. At the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of us were saying, well, the technology at home doesn't work. I don't have a quiet space to work. We couldn't figure out how to get off mute at the beginning, right? But I think we've worked all of that out. And so I think it's not about going back to the office to get to the technology or to get to the heads down, quiet space to work for most of us. I think when you come back to the office, it has to be about connectivity and how do you orient your time together to build that connectivity. I think that's what office time becomes more about.
Are there, though, any benefits of remote work? that are being overlooked or underappreciated that you think we should talk about?
Couple, one is the ability to just get a lot done. There is an efficiency aspect of not being in Ubers, taxis, airport lounges, and TSA lines all day long, right? That took an amount of time. Or if you're from Philadelphia, like I am, sitting on the expressway in traffic, right? So I think that time is really used productively in large part, and productive can also mean making your home life better. You can't underestimate that. I would say though that one of the things I appreciate now a little more than I used to is how much kind of free thinking I was doing, random ideation in those dead spaces, what I thought were dead spaces. Zoning out on that airplane on the tarmac is actually a pretty useful time to be creative. And if you have Zoom calls every single minute of the day, it's a little tough to do that. Speaking of Zoom though, I'd also say that one of the things I found is that online meetings really allow more people to speak and to get their voices heard. Everyone is the exact same size. Everyone's little square, Brady Bunch square, is the same size. And that means more voices are heard. No one's sitting at the head of the table. There is no head of the table. And I think people don't talk over each other as much on online meetings as they do in person. We can just take that as a lesson, I think, when we come back to the office.
Interesting, right? When you're in a conference room, there's somebody sitting at the head, but that's just not the case when you're on a Zoom meeting.
Right.
Yeah. All right, changing direction slightly. Do you worry about eroding support for markets generally and the financial services industry specifically? If so, what do you think can be done to convince people, specifically younger people or people that are coming up through college or starting their careers, that finance as a career is a way to help people?
I've got 3 kids in their mid-20s, and one of them for sure, maybe more, kind of think I'm evil because I'm in financial services, basically, right? And I think that's a real problem for society and for us as an industry. And it probably comes from the kind of the divisive nature politically that we're in right now in general. I'd say, Andrew, it's almost 3 levels though. A distrust of capitalism as a system, of the financial services sector, and of investment management specifically. And the more I read, the more history and economics I read, the more convinced I am that, it sounds cheesy, but that capitalism is really a force for good. Does capitalism create a bunch of billionaires? Absolutely. But it also creates better infant mortality, better literacy, less poverty. There are a lot of really good outcomes that people don't focus on because they focus on the extreme edge cases. That's one. And I think financial services, you're not going to have capitalism work without proper allocation of capital and capital formation. And that's what the finance sector is all about. That's a little tough to explain to someone when they're thinking about teaching or going into healthcare versus finance, right? It doesn't always resonate with folks. And then we give ourselves a black eye sometimes, right? If you look at the way we treat some of our more junior employees, that's been in the news a lot lately, and the hours we expect of them, that's probably just not a reasonable way to go forward. And I think we have to address that. But at the end of the day, I do think we're all working towards really good outcomes. I came up on the client service side of the business at Brandywine, and being able to see, a hospital be able to build a new wing, or a lot of my clients were public pension plans, and the trustees you would spend time with are the cops and firemen who would lose colleagues in the line of duty. And the fact that the money we are making for these systems allows people to pay out benefits, to build new buildings. I think there's no question that we're a force for good. But unfortunately, today, there's an assumption that if one does well financially, individually, you must not be doing well for society. I think you can do both, which is why I enjoy what we do. And I think we need to make sure as an industry that that message is heard more widely and more clearly.
Really important point. I think that gets missed far too often. So Adam, we're coming close to the end of our time. Maybe I could just conclude with a couple of more personal questions, if that's okay.
I guess it depends on how personal.
Well, not too personable. I mentioned in the intro that you studied anthropology in college. Certainly a non-traditional course of study for somebody in our industry. How has studying the humanities proved useful to you in your career?
So first of all, anthropology, if what you're doing is trying to look at a group of people and understand what norms they create, what incentives, what taboos they put together to make sure that that society functions well, that's management of an investment firm, right? You've got PMs, you've got salespeople, you've got IT people, you've got all these different groups that somehow have different beliefs slightly that you need to unite into a single force. And as a manager, you need to make sure that you really put the right incentives in place. You have the right, quote, taboos in place. There's a shared sense of group success. That's a little bit of what I learned in anthropology. Maybe it's pushing it a bit, but that's what I would say. I would also tell you that in social sciences in general, and I'm a big fan, as you might imagine, maybe this is a little of my own bias, but of hiring liberal arts undergraduates, because I think you can teach the other stuff. But what I learned in social sciences, whether it's anthropology or public policy as an undergrad, was that you look and analyze data, you add a dash of creativity to get your own nuanced take on it. And then the most important thing is you have to create an argument and be very articulate about expressing that argument. That's what we have to do every day in the office. So I happen to think it's really good training.
Last question for you, Adam. If you weren't in asset management today, what would you be doing?
Yeah, what I'd want to be doing is like being out there, whether that's hiking or fishing or playing golf or reading a book in the hammock. Like being outside. One of the best things about, I'm not to say best thing about COVID, but for me has been the ability just even during the day to work outside. If it was going to be another job, I'd want to be an architect. And I think that would be fascinating, but given that I have zero spatial sense, probably a good idea that I did not go that direction.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam. On behalf of the entire Coalition Greenwich team, and the virtual audience here today, thank you so much for sharing your insights and taking the time. We really appreciate it.
A real pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
So at this point, I'm just going to back to the full screen here. That wraps up our global session, or the global portion of the conference. I think we've had some very interesting comments here today over the past couple of hours, and hope that you've enjoyed it. We heard some perspectives from top practitioners in the industry on brand, on the hybrid client engagement, on strategy. Adam talked about business models, and we talked about lots of other topics as well. So, although we may be at a bit of a pivot point as an industry, the theme that I heard between the lines today of, all of the speakers, frankly, was around optimism, right? Optimism about opportunities that they see for their businesses, certainly, and collectively as an industry as well. And, given the chaos that's swirling around us every day with the global health crisis, with volatile markets, with the tumultuous social and political situation, I personally found today's comments to be very refreshing and inspiring, and I hope that you did as well. So at this point, we are going to shift from the global sessions to the regional sessions. Logistically, We will reconvene in approximately 8 hours now at 9 p.m. Eastern, which is 9 a.m. in Singapore. And we'll talk about ESG and private markets and the opportunities there in Asia. The EMEA focus session will follow at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, which is 12 noon in London. And then the North American session will start the same time that we started today, 10 a.m. Eastern. We hope that you'll rejoin us for these sessions, but please remember, if you're not able to make them live, it's not a problem. We will be recording the sessions and sending them out after the conference is over. If you have any questions for us, though, please don't hesitate to reach out to us later today. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.